Hey there, this is Kristen Kiefer, and you are listening to episode 2 of the Well Storied podcast. On my blog, I have over 100 articles on topics including the craft of writing, creating and growing your author platform and readership, building your very best writing life, and more. All of these articles were written over the past 2 years before I began the Well Storied podcast. And I think it'd be a shame to never translate those lessons into audio. That's why we're calling today's podcast episode Archives, a look back on some of Well Storied's best articles. Today's topic in particular will be chapters, specifically how to write chapters that captivate readers. You can find the corresponding transcript for this podcast episode on my blog at well-storied.com. Now, for how to write chapters that captivate readers. So, chapters. It occurred to me the other week that I'd yet to talk about them here on Well Storied, despite the fact that I've been running this show for well over 2 years now. How could that have happened? How could I have skipped something so crucial to the structure of a good novel? I'll be honest. For a long time, I really didn't consider chapters to be all that important. Chapters give your novel structure, sure, but over the years, I've really come to realize that that's not all that they do. Chapters also create a sense of pacing, of forward momentum, and, if you play your cards just right, a sense of page-turning urgency. Chapter breaks aren't just places for readers to stick their bookmarks. They're an opportunity for you, the author, to further captivate them. So how can you make sure that you're writing captivating chapters in your own novel? Today, I'm going to break this topic down by answering 5 of your most popular chapter questions. Let's go! Question number 1. How long should chapters be? Too short and you may not captivate your readers, but too long and you may lose their interest. Finding that perfect Goldilocks length for your chapters may seem pretty tough, but it doesn't have to be. When it comes to literature, standard chapter lengths typically fall between 1,000 and 5,000 words. That's roughly 4 to 20 printed pages, with each page containing a standard of 250 words. Are there mega popular books with shorter chapters? Sure, take a look at many of James Patterson's books. And are there any fan favorites that have super long chapters? Of course. Many fantasy and sci-fi books have longer chapters. Most notably, probably the Game of Thrones series by George R.R. Martin. There are no hard and fast rules when it comes to chapter lengths, and there will always be successful exceptions to industry standards. That said, most readers prefer books with moderately long chapters, roughly 6 to 10 pages or about 1,500 to 2,500 words in length. I actually conducted a Twitter poll a long time ago to get this data. Roughly 50 readers weighed in, and I wrote these results down, but silly me never noted the link, and I couldn't find it when I wrote this post. I am so sorry, friends. But if you are trying to decide how long the chapters in your own book should be, I suggest combing through a few popular books in your genre and your age market. How long are the chapters? How many chapters are there in the book as a whole? You don't necessarily have to follow the data you collect, but it's an excellent baseline for knowing what your readers will likely anticipate when they pick up your book. Question number 2. Should all chapters be the same length? Generally speaking, yes. Having consistent chapter lengths creates a strong sense of pacing. It allows readers to fall into a rhythm and encourages them to keep turning pages. That said, there are instances where it's okay to alter the length of a chapter. The key is to do so sparingly, so the change in length actually makes a meaningful impact. Remember, folks, everything in your novel must serve a purpose. So, what are these special instances? Example number 1. A prime example concerns the climax of your story. As you gear up for the big showdown, you may find yourself naturally increasing or decreasing the length of your chapters. Decreasing chapter length actually increases the pace of your story. So employing this during your story's climactic sequence can add to the suspense and the urgency of your storytelling. Pretty cool, right? Alternatively, you may make your chapters longer in order to fit all that action happening during your story's climax. And that's okay too. Lengthening chapters can help engross readers in your story's climax, since there aren't any chapter breaks to steal their attention. Example number 2. You can also employ a change in chapter length when visiting the point of view of a secondary character. This is most often done with villains. For example, in V.E. Schwab's A Gathering of Shadows, both the antagonist and his sidekick have a few point of view chapters throughout the story, and nearly all of them are much shorter than the main character's chapters. Shortening chapter lengths in this instance allows writers to give readers a quick peek into an alternative plotline or point of view. This creates dramatic irony, which is when readers know something the characters do not, which in turn builds suspense. Pretty nifty trick, right? Question number 3. How many scenes should be included in each chapter? Again, there are no hard and fast rules when it comes to structuring your chapters. Both the length of your chapters and the narrative choices that you make as an author will affect how many scenes you include in each chapter. That said, anywhere from 1 to 5 scenes per chapter is fairly common. The good news, you don't have to worry as much about consistency here. Sometimes scenes are lengthy. Other times they're quick bites of pertinent info. As long as the pacing of your chapters is on point, you don't have to worry about whether you're using the same number of scenes in each one. Question number 4. Can you switch point of view characters during a chapter? By starting a new chapter, every time you switch point of view characters, you negate the risk of confusing readers, which is pretty awesome if you ask me. However, switching point of view characters mid-chapter can be done successfully. The key to switching point of view characters mid-chapter is to be absolutely clear about the fact that you are switching point of views. This typically means utilizing a scene break, which is skipping a line to indicate that one scene, or one point of view in this case, has ended and that another has begun. A few things to keep in mind. Switching heads in a chapter typically makes the most narrative sense at the halfway point, where the first half of your chapter features one point of view character and the second half another. The duality of this approach is very easy for readers to digest. Another natural point to switch point of views occurs at the very end of a chapter, typically within the last few lines. This usually occurs when authors want to create dramatic irony, which is, again, giving readers knowledge that the characters don't have in order to build suspense. To give you an example for this last instance, imagine that an entire chapter is told through the point of view character, Henry, as he steals money from the company safe. Then, imagine that the last few lines of the chapter switch to the point of view of Henry's secretary, whom Henry doesn't realize has just witnessed his entire crime. See how that creates suspense? Readers will likely feel the immediate urge to turn the page to find out what happens next. Question number 5. How can you create exciting chapter endings? Every chapter ending leaves readers with an ultimatum. Do they continue reading, or do they shut the book? It's your job as the author to convince them to continue on. The easiest way to captivate readers is with a cliffhanger, right? Stop the scene in the middle of the action and readers are forced to continue reading. Well, it turns out that ending too many chapters with a cliffhanger can feel contrived and gimmicky. You don't want readers to feel like you're trying to push them along. You want them to be so invested in your story that they don't even question turning the page. But how can you do that? Make sure that your main character remains unsatisfied. That's kind of strange advice, right? But hear me out. With any luck, you've already created a strong connection between your reader and your main character. The reader was able to stick themselves in the main character's shoes, and now they've been sucked into the story. If you've done this successfully, putting your main character in a tense and unsatisfied position at the end of each chapter will always leave your readers wanting more. Essentially, you've created an itch, and now your readers will want to scratch it. But what do I mean when I talk about dissatisfaction? It can be anything, really. Maybe an argument, emotional turmoil, physical roadblocks, an injury, relationship issues. Any of these struggles can leave your main character in a place of deep dissatisfaction. Think anger, frustration, confusion, hurt, pain, and so on. And your readers will hopefully feel this too. Just remember that you don't need to cut every chapter off in the middle of a major conflict. Use those cliffhanger moments sparingly, specifically in places where your story's conflict could really use a little boost, and they will serve a much more powerful purpose. So, are you ready to write captivating chapters? As I said a few times throughout this article, there are no true defined rules when it comes to structuring your novel's chapters. That's pretty much how most of things work when it comes to writing, actually. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a few norms your readers are already accustomed to. Your book may be the exception, but in most cases, following the basic rules we outlined today will help you create crazy awesome chapters that captivate your readers so efficiently they won't be able to put your book down. And who doesn't want that, right? Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Well Storied podcast. To catch the transcript of this episode, make sure to head over to well-storied.com. And I'll see you next time. Bye!